Hello everybody, my name is Monika Kabata and I would like to present you part of my PhD that is still very much work in progress and focuses on the merging of counter-terrorism, migration and border control policies in the EU discourse. The relation between terrorist migration as well as the usage of the border control tools to fight terrorism has become a growing topic of interest among scholars. In the political discourse, migration has been presented since years as a threat to the labor market and identity. However, events such as 9/11, the attacks in Madrid, London in 2004 and 2005, as well as the events connected to the so-called migration crisis, have been used to frame migrants as a potential terrorist threat. I pose here three questions. First, how terrorism, migration and border control are constructed in the EU discourse. Further, how counter-terrorism, migration and border control policies are connected in these discourses. And finally, if these discourses lead to securitization. In terms of the literature review, there are many interesting publications on this topic. Unfortunately, because of the time limit, I cannot discuss many of them, so I would like to make just very few remarks. So the first position is the book of Baker-Bill, where he analyzed the EU discourse on counter-terrorism. I mention it here because we agree on some of the themes. However, whereas I rather focus on the constructions of the terrorism that are connected to migration, Chris obviously has presented more strands on it. The second position is the paper of Schmidt, where he analyzes the causal chains between migration and terrorism, and he states that although there are many studies on each of these fields, there is no in-depth study on the connection between them. So this is the gap in the knowledge, and this is where my study comes from. In this study, I use critical discourse analysis that not only focuses on the linguistic features, but is also interested in dimensions of power abuse, injustice, and inequality that result from it. It treats discourse as social practice, where both discourse and practice mutually influence each other. I apply here a special strategy of critical discourse analysis, discourse-historical approach that also takes into account the historical context. The technique that I use for this analysis consists of 7 steps. I first identify the key text, then the keywords and phrases, further linguistic features and the strategies. These first 4 steps have been applied to all documents separately, but when moving to the further steps, it was necessary to look at all of the documents together. Here I identify the main strands in the discourse. I look at intertextuality and interdiscursivity, as well as at the historical context. So, getting to the preliminary results of my analysis, I have distinguished 4 different themes in the discourse on migration, 2 on terrorism and 3 on border control. As I mentioned at the beginning, I rather focus on these constructions that presents link between the policies. So here are only those strands that are important from the perspective of my questions. In case of discourse on migration, some strands don't really present this link. For example, immigration as beneficial for the EU, but I wanted to show that migrants aren't only constructed as a threat, that there are actually quite few different constructions. There's one important presupposition that is present since the beginning, according to which abolishment of checks at the internal borders will result with increase of security threat connected to border crossing, such as immigration, cross-border crime and terrorism. Therefore, the security measures need to be strengthened. An example of it can be seen already in the declaration of Belgian presidency, and here we have the must be, so usage of a strong modality. In case of the strategies that have been used by the EU, we have, for example, the constructive strategy that can be seen in the recommendation of harmonizing means of combating illegal immigration, where we have 2 groups that are constructed as, that is, EU nationals and their families, and them, foreigners to whom apply special rules in regard to entry and employment. Further, the transformation strategy can be seen the intent of changing the construction of asylum seeker, that is the person that needs help, into a person that can potentially abuse the system or be a terrorist, and as well in presenting migration as something positive to beneficial to the EU. And the last strategy, justification strategy, can be seen in conclusions from Tempe, where the EU stated that it wants immigrants to be able to enjoy the free movement of people, as it would be a contradiction to European traditions to deny such a freedom. Therefore, the EU needs to introduce more security measures that are necessary if migrants are able to do so. We can see here that the EU justifies usage of security measures and actually presents migrants as possible threat, because if they weren't seen as threat, the measures wouldn't be necessary. So, the first theme represents narrative that treats immigrants as victims, not as a threat. Across the documents, EU talks about human tragedies, human misery, losses of life. This theme is built around the help to refugees and migrants' death at sea, especially in time of the tragic events. Further, the EU mentions very often the need of solidarity, its responsibility, and gives a critical importance to the cooperation with third countries. So here migration isn't presented as a security threat, but this theme does connect somehow migration and terrorism, because as it will be further presented, both of them are presented as coming from third countries that are poor, that needs EU help, and that cooperation with these countries is crucial to both tackle the problem of immigration and to fight terrorism. It is also it has also another function, as it contributes to the building of the EU identity. The EU is here the defender of the human rights, will defend those that are vulnerable, and has also a role to play in the third countries. Further, the EU constantly refers to migration as a problem, so the same as terrorism, crime, or climate change. Also, migration is a problem across documents. For example, in the conclusions from Seville, it is an issue, in Hague Programme is a problem, and in the strategy for external dimension of justice and home affairs, it is a challenge. Also, the need to change the Dublin Convention presents refugees as a problem from member states. The theme of immigration as a matter of security is a broad theme, and I will be able to present to you just a few examples of it. So in the convention implementing Schengen Agreement, we can observe the structural opposition between an alien and a person, where an alien is treated as possible threat that requires thorough check. Further, European Agenda on Migration and European Agenda on Security directly connect migration and security, as we can read in the letter that it has to be seen in conjunction with the European Agenda on Migration, which will address issues directly relevant to security. A special threat across all documents is posed by illegal immigration. An example can be seen in the Stockholm Programme, where again we have a strong modality. Illegal immigration is very often mentioned in the EU documents just next to terrorism, next to serious crime, and is treated as connected to them. Nevertheless, the EU sometimes presents immigration as something beneficial in terms of the situation in the labour market and the demographic trends in the EU, as we can see in the strategy from 2005 and the strategic guidelines. In terms of the discourse on terrorism, first of all, terrorism is presented as something that comes from outside the EU. For example, in the Counter-Terrorism strategy from 2005, we can read that it has roots in countries beyond the EU. It is interesting because in 4 documents, the EU stated that no particular group can be stigmatized, including Muslims, but later it directly points out the countries where terrorism comes from and justifies introducing border control measures that are directed at the third country nationals. There can be seen similarities between the discourse on migration and terrorism because of the attention put on the cooperation with the third countries that require help in developing, in fighting terrorism and illegal immigration, as well as in decreasing the number of people that seeks protection. Further, especially after the 9/11 Madrid bombing, terrorism has been framed as a very serious crime. In documents that refers to it can be observed a presupposition that there is our society that is open, democratic, tolerant and multicultural, and that terrorism poses threat to it and nobody can feel safe. It both constructs the EU identity and also justifies usage of special measures. Moving to the discourse on border control, in the documents it is suggested that open Europe attracts terrorists and general crime. It can be seen, for example, in the counter-terrorism strategy or in the communication on enhancing security. Therefore, this discourse also contributes to justifying strengthening of border control. Moreover, the border is presented as a place of defense, as a place that protects the EU from the threat that comes from outside. Examples of it can be seen in the 2 regulations of Frontex. It again justifies usage of special measures, but also constructs as a threat what comes from outside, migrants. And the last theme refers to the construction of border control measures as an important tool to fight terrorism. It has been especially visible since the Madrid bombing, and we can see it in the Declaration on Combating Terrorism. This connects all the policies because the border control tools that aim at countering terrorism aren't directed only at suspects of terrorism, but according to the communication, stronger and smarter information systems for borders and security, systems such as Eurodac or the visa information system are primarily targeted at third country nationals in general. Now I would like to say a few words about why analyzing secularization in the EU as a speech act isn't a really easy task. I draw here on the concept of the Copenhagen School that, although is very popular and widely applied by scholars, this treating of secularization as a speech act where the securitizing actor, through utterance, presents the external threat for the referent object, presents it as a matter of urgency that requires extraordinary measures, and where the audience needs to accept this move in order to consider it as a success. So this understanding of secularization has been also strongly contested by scholars. I cannot address here all of the criticism, but to give you an example, we'll look at the case of Frontex from 2004. First of all, looking only at the level of the document can be misleading. In the regulation, there is no statement that in any explicit way names migration as existential security problem. But the document talks about high level of control and surveillance, about risk analysis and operational cooperation in the context of migration. So we could think that it does somehow construct migrants as a threat. The measure that is adopted is the establishment of Frontex. However, is it an extraordinary measure that is introduced in an urgent manner? Neil, in his analysis, claims that Frontex was established in a long process of ordinary dynamic of negotiations and compromise. So looking just at one document doesn't give us actually the whole picture. Also, this document is a result of the securitizing move, we can say, but it's not a speech act that convinced member states to establish the agency. Some solutions to the criticism can provide the concept of collective securitization. So very quickly, in this case, the process starts with the status quo of security discourse, then occur event that disrupt this status. Here it has to be noted that these events don't have to pose an existential threat to the existence of the EU. These events lead to securitizing move that is a recursive interaction between audience and actor. The result of this move can be both routine and exception, so the emergency measures aren't required for securitization to occur. It is sufficient to observe a significant shift towards securitized discourse and a change in the policy actions. So if we apply this approach to the events of migration crisis, we could say that before 2015, border control was already seen as a key for counter-terrorism, but migration crisis has intensified the threats that were previously known. We don't have here an event. There are a few events that leads to the move, such as terrorist attacks, the deaths at the sea, and the reaction of member states, etc. This led to an interaction in the EU. One remark here, when we look at discourse of the EU, it is politically correct in terms of not calling explicitly migration as a security threat. It has been connected to it, but not named as such explicitly. Nevertheless, during the migration crisis, we could actually see the EU saying that terrorists have used migration routes and that migration is directly relevant to security. And this led to policy outputs such as changes to the Schengen information system, visa information system, or Eurodac, and also to proposals of new instruments, so passenger name record or entry-exit system, etc. So moving to the preliminary conclusions, migrants aren't seen only as a threat in the EU, but discourses on terrorism and border control strongly contribute to this construction. In the discourse on migration, we can see the structural opposition not only between EU citizens and migrants, but also inside the group of migrants, where we have the good migrants, so refugees, asylum seekers, legal migration, and bad migrants, that is the illegal, irregular immigrants. We can say that all of the themes are somehow connected. Further, before the migration crisis, the link between migration and terrorism was especially visible in the role of border control, in the presentation of illegal immigration, and in the description of the countries of origin. because during the migration crisis, the EU actually explicitly has stated that terrorists are among migrants, so have linked them. The themes are more visible in certain periods, but generally are present across the whole analyzed time, whereas most of the themes directly contribute to securitization. Even the themes such as immigration as humanitarian problem and immigration as a problem can somehow contribute to representation of immigration as a threat. So this was an extremely brief presentation of what I'm working on right now. I would be very happy to discuss it in some more detail while answering your questions. Here you can see the list of references and the list of the documents that I have analyzed. Thank you very much for attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions.